WWF WrestleMania the arcade game. Man, this is an interesting game. So obviously this is a port of the arcade game, but it was actually ported to the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, 32X, Saturn, and also the PC. But for this review, I'm going to focus on the PlayStation version because obviously that's what I have. Now there are a lot of interesting things about WWF WrestleMania the arcade game, which I'll get into, but perhaps the most interesting thing is the roster. Now this game was originally released in October of 1995, very early into the PlayStation's lifespan. I mean, this game actually came in one of those long box PlayStation cases. In 1997, Sony created its Greatest Hits label, which basically allowed any game that sold over 100,000 copies to rebrand itself as a Greatest Hits and put a green spine on the label here, and basically that got the casual group interested. So if you were a casual shopper and you saw this green little label, you thought, oh well, this sold enough to maybe be a good game. Some people even used it as a way to decide which game they were going to buy before the internet was as prevalent as it was today. And on the back here you can kind of see the wrestlers. By the time that this was re-released in 1997, 5 of these 8 wrestlers were no longer with the WWF.
Matt Bourne, who originally played Doink the Clown, left in December of 1993. After being played by several different people, the Doink character was retired in 1996. Razor Ramon left for WCW in 1996 to form the NWO with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan. Yokozuna made his final WWF appearance in November of 1996 at the Survivor Series, before struggling with his weight and passing away in October of 2000. Survivor Series was also the final appearance of Bam Bam Bigelow, leaving the WWF for ECW in November of 1995. Lex Luger, the only man who was gone before the original PlayStation release, left in August of 95 and infamously showed up on the very first episode of WCW Monday Nitro, which left Bret Hart, while still on the roster when the game re-released, would only be with the WWF through November of 1997 before the infamous Montreal Screwjob happened and Hart left for WCW. Shawn Michaels stayed with the WWF but retired as an in-ring performer in 1998 until coming out of retirement in 2002. And The Undertaker, who is still a somewhat active wrestler with the WWE.
Now, imagine if 2K re-released WWE 2K14. I mean, the rosters are much bigger now and the turnover is much smaller due to no real competitor to the WWE, but it'd still be pretty weird to see this back on the shelves now. I mean, some places still have 2K14 on the shelves still, but it wasn't re-released by WWE or 2K. But enough of this. Let's get into reviewing WWF WrestleMania the arcade game for PlayStation 1.
WrestleMania was originally developed and released by Midway, while Acclaim and Sculptured Software handled the console ports. We talked a bit about Sculptured Software in our WWF Super WrestleMania review, and they're going to continue to pop up throughout these reviews. The game was heavily modeled after Midway's massive success, Mortal Kombat. The graphics are digitized versions of all the wrestlers, which, at the time, was extremely impressive. The fighting is over the top with exaggerated moves and fantastical specials. Every wrestler has a few unique moves that are set up by button combinations. Although the combos are very simple to remember, and since there are only 8 wrestlers to choose from, mastering each character in the game wouldn't take you too long to do. You can even whip your opponent into the ropes and jump off the top turnbuckle. If you're close enough to the ropes, you can send your opponent flying to the outside. Now the rules on the outside are a bit odd. If you stand outside the ring for too long, your health meter will start to go down rapidly. You can actually lose if you try to avoid fighting, so this was great if you were playing a friend who always liked to work the system. The game modes are simple. There's an Intercontinental title mode where you run through a ladder of opponents on your way to the IC title, and there's a WWF World title mode where you do the same thing, only against more opponents. This game just loves throwing you into handicap matches. The only time when I felt the game was overly cheap is when I was facing 2 or more opponents and they trapped me in the middle, because directional controls for pulling off certain moves would get confused as to who I was actually targeting. The WWF World Title mode also ends with a Royal Rumble match. I spent a good hour straight trying to beat this and I just couldn't. The closest I got was 7. I can only imagine losing a bag of quarters at the arcades trying to beat this damn game. And for the record, I do remember playing this arcade game at the mall in the food court. It seemed tougher then, and maybe it was, but I'd like to play the game again. Having the instruction manual definitely helped me out for this review though. It gives you button combinations for moves, superstar facts, commentary from Vince McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler, and a little quote by the wrestler themselves. WrestleMania the arcade game also spawned a sequel, WWF In Your House, which I will be covering soon. You can also see the game in Bret Hart's documentary, Wrestling with Shadows, where he gets pissed off at his kids for not letting him win. All in all, WrestleMania the arcade game is fun. It's more 2D fighter than it is wrestling game, but it still respects wrestling aspects. There's a serious lack of depth to this game, which is fine if it's in an arcade cabinet, but on home consoles I expected a little bit more. There are no unlockable characters, no other game modes. The PlayStation version also has to pause the game to load the next entrant during the Royal Rumble match, which is ridiculous. And surprisingly, there's no music during the matches, which you'd think would definitely be enough for the PlayStation to handle with its use of CDs and all. Another interesting note is that this is the first wrestling game we're reviewing that doesn't have Hulk Hogan. Hogan was off to WCW by this point, wrestling Ric Flair with Shaq in his corner. It is the 3rd game in a row with the name WrestleMania though. With this game, fun overcomes all else. I give WWF WrestleMania the arcade game 3.5 stars out of 5.